Good evening, everyone. This is Wally with Supreme Gecko. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is going to be a fun live stream. Let me see in the chat. I see some names I've not seen here before. Let me know in the chat if you can hear us okay, if you can see us okay. At least hear us. Maybe seeing us isn't the big thing, at least myself. Thank you for joining us. I see Angie, I see Chris, I see Backwoods Ranch, I see Heather. Brittany, I see Brittany joined us. Brittany is like the busiest person in the world, and she has joined us tonight for this chat. We have Kay Thomas. The chat is going crazy. Frank the Tank, but he's not going to be typing. I think he broke all 5 of his fingers, or 8 fingers and 2 thumbs. So sorry to hear that, Frank. I hope you're doing better. I think that you were a little bit under the weather recently, so hope you're doing better. Do we sound okay? Do we look okay? This is going to be a fun live stream. I've waited probably about a year. I've had some discussions on roaches. As you know, I do a lot of Dubia Roaches, I have a lot of geckos, and they need to eat. So years and years ago, I started keeping Dubia Roaches to try to minimize the cost of feeding all of my geckos. Any way that I can save a penny here or a penny there, obviously, but it's a lot of work, and I never knew if I was doing it the correct way. Did a lot of research. There's a ton of information out there on the care of Dubia Roaches. When you're done with this live stream, go out to YouTube and look up how to care for Dubia Roaches, what to feed Dubia Roaches, how to keep Dubia Roaches. You're going to find about 10,000 videos. And again, just like anything, there's some really good information out there. There's some not so good information. And there's information on keeping lots of Dubia Roaches or keeping a colony of 10 or 20 just so that you can feed one animal. Well, tonight we're talking to Kyle from Roach Crossing, and this is going to be an amazing session because Kyle has done this for a long time and really has a great reputation in the hobby. And my understanding is he doesn't just keep roaches, but we're going to try to focus, as much as I love isopods and the conversation could veer off just like that. We're going to try to focus as much as possible on Dubia Roaches and Dubia Roach care. Aqua Garden Zen says, my bearded dragon loves her Dubias. They are crunchy crack. Let's see here if we have it. Cassandra Pope just joined in. Reptilia Exotics, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Hit that like button. And real quick, before we bring Kyle on, just let me mention real quick, and you knew this was coming, make sure you participate in the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. You know where to find the information. Go to Facebook, type in 12 SDOC. Watch this channel for all of the announcements, for the videos. We have a video tomorrow where we're giving away over $500 worth of reptile supplies and reptiles. A couple of really super big gifts in there. And we're only on day 2. Get involved with the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. Did everybody hit that like button? I hope everybody can hear me. I see comments flying through, so I think we're good to go. I'm going to bring on Kyle right now so we can start up this conversation.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is going to be fun. It's going to be fun for me. I hope it's fun for everybody else. I hope so, because like I said before, tons and tons and tons of information out there, and it's hard to decipher. You know, my saying is that whatever you want to find, you can go to the internet and find both the good stuff and the bad stuff. And it's kind of hard to decipher what's right or what's not so right. So Kyle, just to get us started, tell me a little bit, not so much about your company, about your hobbies. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Just a second ago, I saw a little puppy running around, and I know he's brand new. Oh my gosh. I saw a puppy tail. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about you, kind of more from a personal standpoint, if you don't mind.
Well, it's so intimately, all the bug stuff is very intimately intertwined with, just everything for me. But other than that, I'm a naturalist, so I I do a lot of gardening, native planting, like going out for hikes and whatnot, and just sort of seeing how everything ties together. And then, of course, seeing things that I find, different invertebrates and whatnot, and thinking like, can this be kept in captivity? And then just sort of like letting the gears turn about like, where does this fit outside? Where can it fit inside? That kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm just really into nature and just how ecosystems, both the ones outside and then the ones that we create indoors, sort of work, and just really, really big on a lot of that stuff.
How about hobbies? And what do you do in your spare time? I know you have like little, I've tried to contact you before. I know other people have said, to get Kyle is like crazy because he's so busy. What kind of hobbies do you have, if any?
Well, tied into that stuff, I like gardening. So I do a lot of that. I grow vegetables and whatnot for myself. And then also all my gardens for attracting wildlife. I have a dog now. I raise poultry too. I do actually kind of the other flip side of the coin is, I like a lot of outdoor stuff. Oh, Victor, hush. I do a lot of outdoor stuff, but I also like a lot of gaming and stuff like that. And like my gaming chair in here and whatnot. So, I just getting to know people too. I love talking to people. I mean, the trying to tease things apart is very difficult because a lot of people that I've met through roaches, somebody gets a couple of roaches to feed an animal, but then they also happen to be super into sports or super into computer builds or super into something very eclectic. So things really kind of tie back together. So I like getting to know people too and see, what kinds of crazy people have just sort of, have all started to decide to start keeping roaches and other invertebrates. So.
Now, you talk about gaming. This isn't what we're seeing behind you, and I don't want to get into a lot of details just yet, but is this your main room that you're in right now?
Oh no, this is a little office room actually. It used to be a spare room, and then I converted it into an office. And the idea was to try and keep everything nice and organized and clean and whatnot. And then I was like, I could keep a couple bugs in here, keep a closer eye on some projects, and then next thing you know, I got another rack of bugs back there.
So are you packed in? I mean, I could describe my office, and it looks so nice and clean and organized. But I have a pile of papers right there, and I have a bunch of stuff over there, and I have a bunch of fish tanks to my right. I think I'm pointing to my left. So this room is just it's a smaller room. It was my middle son's bedroom. Before my three boys moved out, I claimed this. I couldn't claim the bigger bedroom on the other side of the house because my wife claimed that first with her craft room. So I get the small room, but that's okay because it limits, what I can keep. So is your room as unorganized and crazy, hectic, and chaotic as mine?
I got a bookshelf over here that has a bunch of receipts I still need to catalog. A microscope for dissecting something once in a blue moon, a bunch of random electrical cables in case I need to swap something out. But it's pretty spacious. It's enough room to get really messy when I'm taking stuff off and doing husbandry in here, to the point where it's like, I can't wait to put everything back on the shelf,
Is it big enough to expand maybe into another hobby or two?
I would be not too hard pressed. There's some space that could be better utilized in here, but I do have the whole basement is actually my bug room. So it's 800-ish square feet of just nothing but bugs. So some of this stuff needs to actually go down there, but like I said, I like having it here because then when I'm doing work in here, I can just sort of turn and be like, that needs a little bit of maintenance. That needs more fish flakes. That needs more dog food or something like that. So
nice. I like that, kind of all focused and centric to what you're doing most of the time. That's pretty cool, and I appreciate my office the same. So you delved into it. You have a facility downstairs where you keep all of your bugs. Did you start off? I've been kind of curious with companies that start something like a feeder company. Did you start that way? Did you keep reptiles and then the feeders kind of took over and built, and then you decided to start selling them?
It was the latter, where I was keeping a lot of reptiles, and then I got into roaches to feed the reptiles, and then the roaches just sort of became the insect just sort of became the primary thing. Yeah. So just because it's for me, it's a lot easier to take care of a lot of bugs, and it's kind of nice to be sort of pioneering some husbandry and keeping different species. So that was very appealing too. There's a bit more. I mean, it's still a yearish turnover time with the gratification, but relative to just keeping some reptiles, it's relatively instant gratification to go from 1 or 2 pairs to a company or a culture of a couple thousand. So,
so do you have reptiles still? Do you still have okay? What kind of reptiles are you keeping?
I do have a small collection of reptiles. I used to have a lot more, but I had another room in the basement that I was actually using for reptiles. But at that point in my life, it actually got too expensive to keep all the electricity on in that room, so I had to downsize. So, but currently I do have, I have actually right in that is a starter container with some Asclepian rat snakes in it, right next to the spray bottle.
Oh my gosh! Okay.
2 female Asclepian rat snakes that a friend of mine produced. In the living room, I have some garter snakes, an egg-eating snake, some Standing's day geckos. 2 beardies, and am I forgetting any? And a panther chameleon.
Nice.
So quite a good spread for testing different feeders on, and then being able to give some personal experience and input on what things will eat and what they won't eat. So
what a great idea. So you're focused on the feeders right now, but you have this collection kind of different animals too, very different animals, and you're kind of using those animals to test things out. And you brought up a great point, and this is how I know you, from innovating and trying different things. So some of the conversation that I've heard about you on Facebook, on the internet, is about you trying different things and kind of going off the beaten path, if I can say it like that. So I'm going to jump back to your business. Tell us, so everybody watching here, tell us a little bit about your business. Tell us a lot about your business. What kind of took off from keeping reptiles, keeping animals, into, gosh, I think I'm going to start keeping more and more roaches and insects. Tell us a little bit about that.
So it was when I was living with my parents way back in the ancient times of 2006 to 2016-ish, the space that I had for raising a lot of stuff was actually about the size of the current room that I'm in. And so, with reptiles, a lot of things need more space than a culture of invertebrates. So, the space that you could be using for a couple cultures of insects could be used for, a couple individual geckos or something like that. So it became very appealing to me again for both for producing things and sort of exploring the hobby to keep more different species in a smaller space. And so I was constantly using every single inch of the room that I had. I had 4 of these big racks in a room about this size, and then, all kinds of other containers, hidden away and tucked away and piled up wherever I could in that room to try and make use that space, every inch of it that I possibly could. And so, and at some point it just sort of exploded and overflowed. And at some point I had some things in the basement as well. But, it was, at some point I became very claustrophobic, not, personally, but from a business perspective, because I had this very finite amount of space, and there's only so much stuff that I could do to expand within that space until I, eventually moved out. And then I had all the space in the world, and that's where we are today. So,
at what point did it kind of kick in, and at what point did you decide, gosh, maybe I can do this as a business?
That probably around 2015, 2016, when I had a lot of rare species of inverts that were propagating well. And I just sort of realized, like, hey, I can do this. If I had more space, I could do this and this and this and, propagate more. And that's basically the point where it was like, okay, yeah, I could probably do this,
So do you, I'm going to kind of go off on the business end a little bit here, and then I'm going to kind of circle back and talk more about the species and more specific details about your company. But my question is, do you do, or a question is, do you do reptile shows? Do you do online? How big is Roach Crossing? How big have you gotten? I kind of know this answer, but
so I did Tinley for many years, and Tinley was a lot of prep and very stressful for me. But I would like to do Tinley again. Then of course COVID hit, so that was another thing that sort of got in the way of returning to larger expos like that. I would like to do Tinley again. I feel like that's kind of a hallmark for me. I would get multiple tables and was able to offer these invertebrates that people hadn't seen before, didn't know were available. But currently, I vend the Michigan Reptile Expo monthly, so I'm there every month with a table, and thinking about getting 2 tables pretty soon, actually, because starting to get a little claustrophobic on the 10-foot table stuff. So
now, is most of your business feeders, or is most of your business more focused on specific animals and selling them more as pets per se?
It's always been very 50-50. So there's there's a strong invertebrate presence, people wanting certain species of inverts more than others. And roaches have they've had their time, and then they kind of went, and then they kind of come back and whatnot. And right now, actually, for roaches is probably, we have so many more species now than ever before, including ones that people were just like drooling and fawning over, not even 5 years ago. And so I feel like pet roaches are very much so on the upswing currently. But as far as what I sell, it's about 50-50. And there are places that mass produce Dubia roaches, and people can get the price point on things down very low. But so to deal with that, since I don't quite have the space for that kind of stuff currently, I've shifted over to being able to offer people a variety of different feeders so that they can pick quality feeders for exactly what they need. They need orange head roaches for skinks. They need green banana roaches for chameleons. So being able to offer that variety has been where I've really fleshed out into. And, within the last 2-3 years, it seems like a lot of places have sort of given up on diversifying with their feeder roaches. A lot of people have settled into using just Dubias or hybrid hissers or something like that. And so there's been a very big need for having a diversity of different roaches because, a lot of things will take Dubia roaches. They're a great all-around feeder, but people get picky wild caughts. People have picky captive breds they really want to bulk out. People have breeders that they really want to, plump it up and get the highest clutches and whatnot out of. And then, of course, with invertebrates, there's a lot of invertebrates that aren't particularly suited for eating Dubia roaches. You need that utility and the diversity of species. So something like a Idolomantis, if you have 20 of those, you can't really expect them to go around catching Dubia roaches unless you're going to be tongue feeding them. So people are going to need flying roaches, people are going to need climbing roaches and whatnot for all of those different things.
What an unbelievably, I think, great point. There's some animals that like to see a lot of movement. There's some animals that just a little movement is fine. I was feeding a black soldier fly recently and did a video on them, and somebody came back and said, yeah, my leopard geckos really don't eat them that well. Mm-hmm. I wrote back, and I have tried it, but I'm feeding different feeders to my leopard geckos. I said, why is that? And the person came back and said, well, I don't think they move enough for the leopard geckos. Mm-hmm. I thought that's a great point. So different animals have different requirements. And like you said, climbing or how fast they are, how slow they are. It's interesting to hear that perspective. Cassandra said, talking about shows, have you thought about Show Me Reptiles and Exotics or Scaled Up Expo? So Scaled Up Expos is the Northern Wisconsin reptile show. And you certainly know about Show Me Reptiles. Have you thought about those different shows as well? More, Illinois, more Wisconsin, or St. Louis?
I have. The problem for me is that this what I have going on here is kind of a very fine-tuned machine. And so while I can take, periods of time to get away from things, to do collecting trips and whatnot.
Oops.
pick and choose my battles. And with the local expo, it's only about 40 minutes away. So that's a one-day thing that I can drive to and drive back from. And Tinley, again, like I had said earlier, is very stressful and quite a bit of work, but it's like, oh, it's so worth it because, it's a couple of days. And then it's, for me, I would usually do fall. So it was once a year. So it's like, okay, I put a lot of energy into this big hurrah, and then I don't have to worry about it again. So I have thought about doing some other things, but it's, it's dependent on the future too. I have somebody who's currently doing contract work for me in terms of taking care of my animals and whatnot. So
okay.
Expanding into the future, if I can find better, really good, reliable work and get a good crew together for that, it'll open up different opportunities for me to go out and do more shows. But at the same time, like I said, I enjoy doing what I do. And I like being able to meticulously check on my culture. So it's just gonna be one of those things. It's gonna depend on the future and see how things go.
It's hard. I know what you're talking about with the shows. We do about, I don't know, a dozen shows a year, and it takes a day to prepare. Then you have the day of the show, and then it takes a day to kind of get back and clean empty tubs and get the animals put away. It takes a lot to do a show. Just one show. If you do a 2-day show, 3-day show, it really takes out of your schedule. It's really hard. We talked about the balance between the pet animals that you're selling and the feeders. I'm going to kind of focus a little bit on the feeders. Are you selling mostly Dubias as your feeders, and how big is the company? And I don't mean to get too personal here, but how many tubs? Give us a kind of a feel for how big this operation really is.
So for Dubias, actually, my entire colony currently is in a 10-gallon tank. I actually do not have a very large stock of Dubias to keep on hand because, competition to compete with people who are producing millions of them. So, but as far as feeder roaches, weekly, several hundred to several thousand, depending on what species of various species.
Wow.
Lobster roaches, dusky caves, 6-spots, ivory heads. For Florida, sometimes discoids, but I get cleaned out of those very quickly. Pallid roaches. There's a whole world of other different feeder roaches out there than Dubias. So that's where a lot of my sales are from. I do get a good number of Dubias sales here and there. Because of the way that I raise them, they tend to be plumper and the adult size is larger, so they're a bit larger than people are expecting. But primarily it's the other species that I sell a lot of.
Very interesting. I didn't realize that. I thought that you were selling just a gazillion Dubias, but you're just all across the board, and I can see that you could really get into Dubias and just go crazy with them. But I see you also wanting to kind of diversify and do what you love to do, not just become a Dubia factory. You want to kind of spread out a little bit and really enjoy this whole process. And that's really cool. That's kind of my attitude as well. Years ago, I did leopard geckos, and it became more of a production, crank them out and just too many. And I pulled way back on leopard geckos, and I did what I love to do. So that's very admirable. Here's a question for you. How much time do you devote to this whole hobby? How much time a week do you devote to the hobby, do you think?
It's basically a full-time job. It can be 30 hours of work a week with shipping and help, or it could be 40 to 50 hours a week. And depending on, when the ball is rolling, when I am not on hiatus and whatnot, it's actually less work because there's less colonies that need to be, refreshed or checked on very deeply and whatnot. So, when the gears are all turning at full speed, it's about 30-ish hours a week, if not 30 to 40. So.
Do you have a full-time job as well?
This is my full-time job. So.
Okay. Very cool.
Over the summer, I did work full-time, and this was the problem, was trying to mash these two things together at the same time when I didn't have a good, reliable assistant. I did work full time doing native plant landscaping and habitat restoration and whatnot. So that's where I was over the summer. I was considering, I could probably do these two things, and balance it out, but didn't quite work out that way. Especially when I needed a good assistant, and my assistant at the time ended up getting a full time job. Doing something that he really loved, which was interpreting at a nature center. So I was very happy for him. But at the same time, I was like, I have to quit this and go back to keeping things going and taking care of my bugs. So that's the decision that I had to make. So right now it is a full-time job, basically. So
it's nearly impossible to try to find that balance. And if you found the balance, again, hats off to you. I know when I was working full-time, I'm retired, luckily, right now. So I have a good balance. I love my boss now. But when I was doing this before, it was always difficult. I'm spending too much time in the reptile room. I'm spending too much time with the family, the reptiles. I need to get home and feed them. It was always, working late. Oh my gosh, I'm working late and I've got to ask my wife to feed the geckos. It's a struggle, especially if you have a bigger operation. Probably a bad word, but we have a question on the board. What are some other feeder roaches that are good for bearded dragons and leopard geckos that don't fly besides dubias?
So there are a lot of options, and especially in the larger size category. So things like Blabberus fusca, Blabberus discoidalis, Blabberus posticus, Blabberus distanta, Blabberus species ivory. If you need to go a little bit smaller than that, there's like Shelfordella, the Nofita, the lobster roaches, Henschutedenia, giant lobster roaches. So there's a lot of options. They're very hardy eaters, and I have really yet to find a roach that they won't eat. In my experience. So
you talk about lobster roaches, and I talk about isopods, and my huge issue with some isopods is dwarf whites. I just can't. I love dwarf whites. I hate dwarf whites because dwarf whites get into everything and literally destroy other isopod colonies. At least it's been that way for me. For feeders, my bane is lobster roaches. And I'll tell you a quick story, and you probably can already guess where I'm going with this. But years and years ago, I did all kinds of roaches. I did lobsters. I fed at one point, and my wife had a daycare center downstairs. She kept 5 or 6 kids, and I had the facility, half of the basement. She had the other half, nicely, carpet and built up and everything. Finished basement, but I had the empty facility, some temporary walls. But anyways, I had some tanks set up. One had day geckos. I'd feed the day geckos lobster roaches. I just love them. They're going all over the tank. One day I was cleaning the day gecko tank, and I took out the wood, and I have a cart, and movable cart, put everything on the cart, and I took the big plant out of this was a 29 gallon, took the big tank, our plant out, put it on the cart, turned around, taking some other stuff. I turned to the cart, and here the roaches were coming out of the plant like rats out of a sinking ship. And now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, daycare center, I can't have the parents, can't have the kids, can't have my wife finding all of these roaches. So I'm stomping and putting the plant and doing a dance around these roaches, trying to kill them. It was just a disaster. That night, I had 2, 100 quart tubs, maybe big, 120, I don't know. But that night, winter Wisconsin, I took them outside and let the winter Wisconsin weather take care of them. And that was the end of lobster roaches here in the house. Suggestions to people to contain lobster roaches. Any thoughts? What do you tell people when they say, I don't want lobster roaches, they're going to get all over the place?
So I tongue feed my geckos and whatnot. I tongue feed pretty much everything. But if you're not going to be doing that, using a smooth dish that has had the inner rim coated with some sort of barrier, you can use olive oil. You can use petroleum jelly. You can use a lot of things. I have a product called Roach Crossing on my site, which is I don't know the exact ingredients. It's a proprietary blend of Adam Messias, who's at another roach company, but he sells that to me, and then I offer it for sale. It's food safe. It's heat and cold resistant. It has a lot of beneficial qualities, and and it's also really effective at keeping things contained. I have had so many breakthroughs with keeping things that are very escapey because of using this new barrier. So I would recommend, using some sort of barrier such as Roach Crossing or whatever on the inside of a bowl if you're feeding from a bowl. The other thing about lobster roaches is that they're unable to reproduce inside of, the typical home. So they can get into other containers, and if the conditions are right for them, they can breed and propagate and stick around in there. But they aren't going to get out into your house and reproduce or anything. In fact, I have a good story about that. When I was in high school, I had like a 60-quart bin or something of lobster roaches, and I had taken it downstairs to sort out some for an order or do something with that. I was doing something, and it was getting late, and I think my mom was yelling at me to get to bed or whatever, so I left it down there so I would go back in the morning and finish working on it or whatever. So just an open bin of lobster roaches at the bottom of the stairs. Well, what my family does is, dirty clothes at the end of the day get thrown down the stairs so they get moved to the laundry room. So my parents, not realizing there was an open bin of lobster roaches at the very bottom of the steps, threw their laundry downstairs. And so there was, laundry draped into and hanging out of the giant lobster roach colony, or this lobster roach colony, this big colony. And so the next morning, I remember my dad waking me up next day. He was like, "Kyle, what are these roaches everywhere, Kyle? What the hell?" And stuff like that. And so I would estimate that maybe a couple hundred of them got out into the house that within the frame of maybe 7 hours or something like that. And there was never an issue or anything with lobster roaches at my parents' house. They all desiccated over and whatnot. So they may stick around a little bit, kind of like how hissers and dubias will do, but eventually it's too dry for them since they're tropical roaches, tropical, used to more humid conditions. Although dubias, as I was doing a little bit of research before this to have a little bit more, background knowledge in them in the wild and whatnot, they actually come from some places that get surprisingly dry and cold. The parts of South America that they come from are more temperate than you would expect. They're from more the southern part of South America, beyond the tropical area. It's more of a subtropical, almost temperate place. So, but anyways, that's my experience with lobster roaches getting out and whatnot. So,
I have almost an identical kind of story, and I'll share it real quick because it's crazy. I have a real close friend. Used to keep tubs of roaches for his bigger animals, Dubia Roaches, and he did the typical tub, big hole in the top, screen to cover it, and hot glue and everything. He said he was in bed one night, and I'll try to keep this as quick as possible. He was in bed, felt something on his face, woke up, light on, and dubias all over the place. He got over to the dubia tub, and the screen, the metal screen had let go with the hot glue, fallen in, and provided a real nice roach ladder for all. And he said he said he thought there were thousands in his bedroom. I said, what did you do? I mean, that's crazy. He said, I moved. I said, are you really? He said, yeah, I was in the process of moving anyway. So I collected some and I just moved. It's just unbelievable. I tell you, to hear him say this story, unbelievable. Just incredible. I wanted to touch on something. You were talking about, again, dubia roaches, but the pet roaches as well. Mm-hmm. What are some of your big hitters? What are some of the roaches that you're now collecting that you've been waiting for, that you just kind of drool over? Oh my gosh, I received this roach and I'm just so happy about working with it. And you're going to have to share some common names if you have the common names with us.
Yeah, that can be a problem with some of the stuff. I actually, as I noted before, I've got a lot of the higher priority stuff, at least the smaller things, up in these containers here that I've received and whatnot. And my taste may not necessarily align with the average roach connoisseurs per se. But in fact, let me try and catch one of these particularly stunning ones and see if I can show it
Yeah,
in an
absolutely.
effective manner is the real thing here. So
We had actually, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. This is one that I've been very eager to get propagating in good numbers for several years, and it is a beautiful species. Unfortunately, it is very fast, so it's not the best for handling, but it is an excellent display. Whoop, cockroach.
And there it goes.
So this is a Hemithyrsospora vittata. This is a I'm not sure what the current common name is. Striped sun roach. So this is an adult, and the nymphs are actually black, white, and red. They're very pretty. They're day active. The newborn nymphs are actually ant mimics, so they look like little ants. They hold their abdomens up and everything. So, and then they grow into nymphs that are black and white striped with little red dot in the center of the back. And again, they're day active, and this is an adult. Whoop, and there it goes onto my laptop. Excellent for display. Obviously, as I said before, not the best for handling. So this is one I've been very psyched about because I have failed twice with them, and I have a very good crop of nymphs currently, and the colony seems to be taking off, which is very exciting for me to be able to offer them, and also be able to say how to keep them without killing your colony. So this is one that I've been very excited about, is the striped sun roach, Hemithyrsospora vittata.
So are they delicate? Are they sensitive? What were your struggles initially with these, and what did you have to fix to start keeping these successfully?
So the first couple of instars seem to be very sensitive to too much stagnant conditions. The species in general does not like stagnant conditions, but it also doesn't like to be dry either. So being able to provide high humidity with high ventilation, and also I have a heat lamp on them too, which encourages them to come out during the daytime as well. They're naturally day active. They pollinate flowers actually, but to get them a little bit more focused in one area and to give them a temperature gradient. So basically keeping things warm enough to accommodate them, while also keeping things moist enough, while also, allowing for that good ventilation without things drying out immediately. And so the combination of heat, ventilation, and good humidity, I believe, is what I can attribute to the current success.
Nice. So a lot of the viewers here on the Supreme Gecko channel obviously are gecko keepers, but a lot of them are isopod keepers as well. So you're talking about high humidity, you're talking about good air movement, you're talking about ventilation, air circulation. That's some of the struggles that some isopods have to try to keep the humidity up a little bit without having the whole enclosure be, sopping moist, but also keep some of that airflow going as well. So very similar struggles with some isopods. That's very interesting. We've had a couple of questions here, and everybody loved seeing that roach. Do you have some bigger ones that you could show us?
I do, actually.
That would be cool.
One that we can tie in with the people who very much so enjoy isopods, actually.
Oh, very good.
So, again, as I said, my tastes don't always align with, a lot of other people's for some types of roaches. I had two friends who just got back doing a very quick collecting trip through Florida, and they found some possibly undescribed roaches near the Everglades, and we had a couple in culture from before. So I'm very excited about those. They are very pretty roaches, but they're nocturnal, and they do like to hide under bark. But this is something that I think is a little bit more sort of the mainstream speed here. This is a Pseudoglomerus Magnifica. This is a magnificent emerald roach. And
yes.
A lot of members of this genus can actually, Pseudoglomerus can't roll up all the way, but they may have lost it evolutionarily, secondarily. But their relatives, Paraspherus, can. So they're sometimes called, roly-poly roaches. So this is one of the big ones. This is the big shiny green one. Pseudoglomerus Magnifica, and this is the pure stock from Cuc Phuong in Vietnam instead of the hybrids or integrates. So, and of course, the lighting doesn't do it justice, but that's getting a good amount of the shine there. So, this is good, sizable, handleable roach. I mean, the tarsi on this thing are just really adapted to cling to stuff. So she's got very good grip on my finger right now. And of course, they're surprisingly large from a group of roaches that are usually under an inch. She's over an inch, so.
That's a beautiful, beautiful animal. And your lighting is really good, but I can imagine under fluorescence, under, more appropriate lighting for showing off animals, that animal probably just glows.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool. There's another, somebody asked what my staples are for crested geckos. I'll just jump into that real quick. I want to focus on Kyle's information here, but my crested gecko staples are for feeder insects are dubias. I occasionally feed mealworms, baby cresteds. I feed tons of baby mealworms. So just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Seeing that animal reminds me that there's somebody was talking about, I heard this a couple of months ago, and I try to understand as much about roaches as I possibly can, but somebody was talking about a really big one that takes like 2 or 3 years to mature.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to breed. It's very, very expensive, hard to find in the hobby because of some of the I guess not requirements, but just the time that it takes to get these roaches going. Do you know, I know that's very general, but do you know what I'm talking about, Kyle?
That is Macropenestia rhinoceros.
Yes.
Rhino roaches. So, and I've had those available on and off. Last year was not a very good year for me for producing rhino roaches, but actually, usually I get babies. When I get babies, it's usually in the spring, somewhere between February and May. I checked on them yesterday to get some pictures for a friend and realized I had babies that had popped up.
Oh, fantastic.
So that would be my first babies in a year and a half ish, and at the exactly wrong air quotes time of year for them. So I was very happy about that. So yes, they can take a very long time to mature. The fastest I've had one reach adulthood was a female that matured in a year. I have no idea how or why that happened. But usually it's more like 2 to 4 years, depending on temperature, diet quality, if there's another roach in the container, etc. So
I heard you could give them the same steroids that Canseco and McGuire used to boost. I don't know. Yeah, everything that I've heard about them is 2 to 3 years, and it's a pain in the butt, but obviously well worth it because they're super big, they're really attractive, really cool roach.
They live a very long time too. It's believed that adults can live over 10 years, so that's after maturing. The longest I've had them live was 7 or 8 years after maturing, and that was with the stress from 2 of the moves that I had, which was not very kind to them. So wow. I would believe the 10 years after reaching maturity. So and you only get 1 litter every year, so there's that too.
I get asked a lot at reptile shows, how do you keep your geckos? What kind of care? And that is such a general question. It's hard because there's so many different geckos. There's from as arid and as hot as you can get it to as wet and cool as you can get it. Cave geckos to Chondrodactylus. It's just, all over the place. But where'd it go? Oh my gosh, that's cool.
They'll stick around.
Let me ask.
On my face.
Yeah, not like the other one jumping around and everything. But let me ask you this, because we're focusing a little bit more on dubias. What's your general care for dubia roaches?
So in the one enclosure that I have of them, it's about 1 inch of coconut fiber, 1 inch of cypress mulch, and then a bunch of very sturdy, coarse bark for them to climb up and under and onto and whatnot. And temperature is usually maintained on the hot end 90-ish during the day, and then at nighttime, temperature drop into whatever the room temperature is, which is anywhere from 72 to 80 degrees. So something to note with a lot of roaches, a lot of tropical organisms that people don't usually seem to think about is the difference in the day and nighttime temperature in most tropical and subtropical places. There is a greater difference between the day and night temperature than there is between the average temperature during their warm and cold seasons. So in a tropical place, it could be 90 during the day, and then depending on the humidity and the location, it could drop into the high 50s at night. And that's very normal, and a lot of things are adapted to that. And in fact, many tropical roaches actually do better when they're given that temperature drop. When you keep them at one temperature all the time, especially if they can't physically thermoregulate from going from the hot end to a cool end or whatever, it's very stressful on their bodies. So you end up with stunted adults, or you end up with random deaths or other health problems.
Do you find the lifespan, you're shortening the lifespan if you just keep them at the same temperature? Very interesting. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to invite you here, is because I know you're kind of playing around with different things like that. And that is really, really cool to hear, because I have not heard that before, that you possibly might need this temperature variant. I know, and again, lower life forms, higher life forms, but working with geckos, I know some of the arid, I should even say arid geckos, some of the desert geckos need a really, really warm, hot, warm spot, and regular temperature, for the rest of the enclosure. But they need that significant drop at night. They have to have that significant drop at night, and then they need a good low temperature brumation period. It's interesting to hear that some roaches need that same kind of adjustment to their care as well. So, and I'm sure that we have people that are listening that have had large losses or short lifespans or stunted animals, and that might be one of the reasons. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're feeding your roaches, how you provide moisture to your roaches?
I'm going to put this lovely lady back so that you can get back to the task of making babies, because I would love to have some babies available from these sooner than later.
Absolutely. Hi, Moon over Miami.
For all of my roaches, and for a lot of my invertebrates, everything from isopods to millipedes to roaches to amphipods, etc., get a diet of once a week-ish. The crappiest, lowest quality, run-of-the-mill dog food that money can buy at the local Menards. So the bag that's 50 pounds for $20, and some other food item like an apple or a piece of eggplant or squash or banana or something like that. So, and I use it for everything from my expensive Cubaris to my rhino roaches to my Pseudoglomerus to my Dubias to the lobster roaches. Everything gets dog food or apple or eggplant or whatever I can find at the local fruit market. So,
unbelievable. That's mind-blowing. So you can go online right now. You can go online and you can look up Dubia Roach food, and you're going to find 20 different brands that have 10 or 15, I bet you, 10 or 15 ingredients in them. Not to say that dog food isn't made up of other, foods. I'm just saying that these blends of roach food, premium, supreme, I'll use the word supreme, premium, supreme roach foods has all of these different ingredients, and you're successfully using dog food. What about protein? Do you feel that I can't just go out to the local grocery store and pick up a bag of dog food. I believe, and this is my opinion, but I'd like to hear what you think about this. And grab a bag of dog food that's really super high in protein, bring it in, and expect the Dubias to do well with that. And more importantly, what they're passing on to the animals. What are your thoughts on that?
So something that people really need to internalize about keeping roaches is that, the whole cultural zeitgeist about, oh, roaches can survive on anything. Roaches, they eat anything, they'll be fine after a nuclear disaster, blah blah blah. Roaches are so successful and able to eat a lot of this and that because the majority of them, except for those in the family Nocticolidae, have a very complex array of endosymbiont bacteria that are only found in roaches, the bladder-bacteria. And what those allow them to do is to basically perpetually recycle nitrogen that they intake. So they can eat, something like bird poop or maybe a little bit of dead skin or something they find in the wild or whatever. And their body is able to constantly make use of that nitrogen instead of just passing it right through like a lot of other organisms would. And that's their leg up, is being able to eat very low quality things and extract and retain a lot of the nutrition because of their complex endosymbionts. So what happens when you take an organism that has this very complex inner environment that is able to process and reutilize protein, nitrogen is a large component of proteins, you basically overwhelm their system and it's not good for them. So things about high protein diets should not be anywhere in association with the word cockroach. So they're scavengers, most of them. In fact, in general, they're generalists. Their different niches in the wild are more about being able to utilize these poor quality food sources and whatnot, with a couple of exceptions, and being able to adapt to different other things like predation or humidity and whatnot. So basically, something very important, a big takeaway I would think from this live stream here is stop thinking about protein with roaches. Stop it. All this stuff with, back when I started keeping roaches, there was a big thing with orange head roaches with Eublaberus posticus about, oh, they're protein hungry. Oh, they need lots of protein. Oh, they wing bite if they don't have enough protein. But this was based on the assumption that the wings on Eublaberus posticus are not meant or not naturally beat up and ragged at the ends. If you look at pictures of Eublaberus posticus in their wild habitat, which is bat caves and places like Trinidad and whatnot, they have these beat up looking wings. When they're receiving their so-called natural diet of bat guano and whatever falls to the cave floor and whatnot. So instead of thinking that, oh, this is a problem that we need to fix in captivity and it's because of, I don't know, they're eating each other because they want protein, sort of looking at things a different way and being like, maybe the wings aren't intended to last. Maybe they're not intended to look perfect like we think they are, So they're not actually nibbling or biting each other's wings. They're just not intended to last. They're not a flying cockroach. They have basically no use for the wings as adults. They're constantly being abraded from rubbing up against other cockroaches. There's no selective pressure for them to maintain perfect, beautiful wings. It's a human thing that we've sort of imposed on them, thinking that, oh, they look perfect in the wild or something like that. And if anything, it's probably more tied to moisture, the problems. A lot of tropical roaches in general, with a few exceptions, things need more moisture than you would anticipate. They're able to hunker down in a stump for a couple of hours, or if they're in Florida, it rains and then it dries, and then it rains and then it dries. Or in the case of Dubias, a bunch of them huddle together in like a stump or under bark to retain moisture for a couple of months during the dry, cold times, and then all of a sudden it's lush and verdant again, and then they can go out and get it from their food sources and whatnot. So basically, tying back to the roach diet is these mixes of high protein and all this other stuff are not actually good for the roaches and may result in increased mortality. You can give the roaches gout. If you give them too much protein, they will suffer from gout, because they also most roaches don't have a mechanism to get rid of extra nitrogen, so they will just die of gout. Some roaches, like Parcoblata, wood roaches, Paratemnopteryx, mostly ectobiids, which are not usually used as feeders, they can actually excrete the extra nitrogen in the form of a little white pellet. So too much protein for them isn't as big as a problem as something for like Blaptica or Blabberus, where you're just going to kill them from too much protein, basically.
What a great review of that. We have a bunch of questions. I don't know if I have anything to add to that, because that's just spot on to what I've always assumed, and I've always done too. And my concern is, with too much protein, you're passing that on to your geckos or your animals as well. Because Sandra is asking, what about dry? And we're going to hit about 3 or 4 questions here real quick, if you don't mind, Kyle. What about dry cat food?
So to circle back to things before, the whole idea of high protein blended mixes of stuff is not good for roaches. If you focus just on the high protein, or just on a one powdered diet, throw it in with the roaches and say, okay, there you go, that's it. That's not good either. It has been proven that roaches are very in tune with what their body needs in terms of nutrition, and they're able to select that when they're given the option to. So the best thing you can do is offer a lot of different foods at the same time, so that the roaches can go and get what they need, because the nutrient requirements of an adult male, of an adult female that's has an ooth in her, of an adult female that just matured is trying to make eggs, of a first instar, are all very different from each other, in the moment. So if you offer them 2-3 things to choose from, the individuals can pick what they need when they need it. So if you offer them dry cat food, I won't say, absolutely no, worst thing ever to give them cat food at all. What I would say is, you can give it to them, but also offer a fruit or a veggie, or some dog food, or whatever. Give them a diversity, because an adult female might need that extra protein to produce eggs, but an adult male probably isn't. An individual that's about to go into a molt probably is not going to need that extra protein if it's already developing the cuticle and whatnot. So basically, giving them the option to pick what they need is the best thing you can do, and giving them several options at the same time, which is why I use the dog food chunks and then an apple. Some individuals will grab the dog food, some of them will grab the apple, some of them will opt to eat the leaves or the wood or the other frass from the other roaches, but the bottom line is they have a choice in what they need. So I don't have those kinds of deaths due to diet, due to gout or whatnot.
Perfect. Do you crush your dog food?
No, I do not, because roaches have chewing mouth parts. They're perfectly capable. They also salivate too. Hissing cockroaches in particular make a lot of saliva. They're able to, their mouth parts are designed for chewing and biting into things. So I do not mash or grind the dog food up or anything like that.
Perfect. Could some roaches be used in bioactive setups?
Absolutely. I recommend Blabberus for people keeping larger reptiles like tegus and monitors. The trade-off there is that you have to hope that the roaches develop the behaviors to stay out of the way of the things that could possibly eat them. And a lot of them will do that. It has been shown that roaches are capable of associative learning. The very basic associative learning is what the data says so far, but enough to know that, hey, we can come out and stay out and about when there's, no lizard in this enclosure. And also able to learn that, hey, when the light's on, there's something that's going to be hunting us, so we need to only come out when the lights are off. So they're able to adapt in that capacity. So yes, they can be used in bioactive setups, and they have a lot of processing power compared to isopods and amphipods and whatnot. They really pack a punch, because that's what a lot of them do in the wild, especially bat cave species.
Outstanding. How well do Dubias do at room temperatures? I've had my cultures for about 2 years, and they seem fine. I only turned on heating pads a few months for breeding.
So if your colony was doing well for years, what I say is, if it works, it works. People will contact me and basically say, with some of their roaches, I have this big, healthy, thriving colony. Should I do something different? And it's just like, if you've got a system with whatever things you're doing are working, keep it up. So adding heat will get faster hatches, faster growth out of most roach species, and especially, as I said before, if you offer a day-night temperature drop too, you will actually produce larger adults that way.
Excellent.
Can adult crusty eat an adult male roach? depends on how big the adult cresty is. A lot of reptiles eat much larger prey items in the wild than they do, or they go after much larger in the wild than you would think they do in captivity. So if you look up pictures of chameleons or beardies in the wild, they've got their face just absolutely stuffed with a locust or a cockroach or a moth or something like that, and in captivity we would look at that and be like, it's going to choke, it's going to be impacted or whatever. And that's not really an issue for things that are in their proper conditions and whatnot. So it also depends on the individual cresty. So if it'll even take a dubia roach. So it's worth a try. If it's a large cresty, I would say it can't hurt to give it a try. But again, it's up to you. The wings can be the only thing is the wings on roaches can sometimes be a little bit irritating to cresteds that are not used to eating insect prey. If they've been on a Rapashi diet or something, or Pangea diet, they may not recognize how to swallow it the right way or whatever, so they may just spit it out basically. So.
Good point. If you're doing something different, do it in a small dose. Don't just go, cold turkey with the crested gecko diet and just start feeding adult dubias. We talked about foods. What do you use for a moisture source? What do you give your dubias to allow them to, this is a terrible way of saying it, but to drink? And I just realized we're over an hour, and I promised that this would run an hour. I have a few more questions, if you don't mind staying on.
I'm here for all of this.
This is great information.
For hydrating my roaches, I don't use water crystals or anything like that. I can't remember somebody had brought up to me that some of the ingredients in those water crystals can possibly have long-term effects on both the roaches and also be transferred to reptiles and whatnot. So I've never used water crystals. I always mist or give them moisture in the form of like an apple or fruit or vegetable or whatnot. So I try to do a nightly misting when it's dry in the house, like in the winter. During the summer, I'm a lot more lax with it, so I may do a light misting every couple of days. A lot of roaches are very good at conserving their humidity if they have a substrate. That's another thing. If you have a substrate, you can get away with a lot more leniency because it retains that moisture. It gives the roaches somewhere moist to retreat into. If you have just a bare bottom tub, you're going to have to keep hydrating as the water evaporates and the roaches don't have anywhere that they can cluster or hide to retain that humidity. That is a behavior that they have for many species, specifically to retain moisture, is to huddle up. Because when they exhale, they're letting out, not just carbon dioxide in minute amounts, but also water. So by several of them bunching up in an area, they're not going to be losing as much water. They're building up a nice little human microclimate. So, but that's less the case when you have, a colony with no substrate. You kind of destroy that aspect of their behavioral options.
What another great point, because I keep mine bare bottom, but it requires a lot of maintenance. It requires, if not daily maintenance, every other day at minimum. So, great point about the substrate. Barbara is asking, what kind of substrate are you using?
So my base substrate for everything is coconut fiber.
Yep. Okay.
Really, the fine coconut fiber. I actually like it when it's just a touch coarse. It's kind of, sometimes you get a batch that's almost like dust. Sometimes you get it that's a little bit coarse. I like the coarser stuff because it doesn't compact as much and it seems to absorb and hold more water, or at least it's also looser for the roaches to burrow into. So coconut fiber, and then of course some sort of hardwood mulch on top of that.
About an inch or so. It doesn't really matter. But
it depends on how dry your room is and whatnot. So, but I usually do 1 inch to 2 inches, and then overall substrate can be 2 inches to 4 inches with all the leaf litter, sphagnum moss, and whatnot for fancier things on top of that.
So, again, I keep focusing on dubias and bare bottom and egg cartons, and I'm keeping them probably as bad as I can possibly keep them. But we're also talking, and Kyle specifically is talking about some kind of rarer roaches here. So people, please keep that in mind. And again, going back to what you said before, if it's working for you, do your research, listen to podcasts like this or live streams like this, and absorb as much information as you can. But if it's working for you, maybe you don't want to change things up too much. How do you, Andre asks, how do you provide heat to your dubia?
So I have my Dubia bin currently actually has a top basking light on it during the daytime, but you can also do bottom heat. Again, as I said before, it's important to give them the option to get away from the heat if they want to, or to get closer to it if they want to. They're not too picky about how you offer them their heat, basically. So you even just ambient heat. If you have a very hot room, they may be okay with the ambient heat in there.
I have a ton of notes here. So somebody said I'm going to be rewatching this video. I'm here, listening, but I'm going to rewatch this video too. This is great information. I've got to go there because I have a very firm idea on this, and I'm probably wrong, but maybe I'm not. But I hear it all the time from a couple of other breeders. How do you feel about, I'm going to ask specifically again about Dubia. So let's say I have a colony, like I do, I have several colonies of Dubia roaches going for my geckos. If I just let them go and eventually all the adults will die, but I leave some babies in there to rebuild that specific colony, and I never mix and match, I never bring in new blood. Do you feel that I would ever have a problem with genetic diversity? Do you think at some point, so I'm guessing by your smile, this isn't the first time you've had this conversation.
It is not.
Yeah. Am I going to have a problem with my roach colony and every roach is going to have 14 eyes and only 2 legs, and because I haven't brought in new blood? And here's my thought. I'm going to share this, and you can say, Wally, you're full of BS. My thought is, the lower the life form, the less of a problem you're going to. I'm not saying that you eliminate the problem. My thought is you minimize the problem with lower life forms, especially something like an isopod, especially something like a Dubia roach. You're not going to see a lot of that. And if you keep a big enough colony, let's say a 120 quart enclosure, you're probably never ever going to see something like that. Am I full of BS, or am I close to the facts? What do you think?
So my answer is, not just for lower life forms, but for also higher life forms, is that no. It depends on, it's all about selective pressure, basically. So as a quick example, people tend to villainize inbreeding, but it's a very natural phenomenon. It's one of the ways the different species arise. And there are many examples of higher life forms, things like birds and reptiles, whose functional population has gone down into the single digits, and we're fine. There's also been examples where things have gone down into the single digits and not been fine. So one example off the top of my head, there are a bunch of birds on the island of Mauritius, like the Mauritius kestrel, where there were only 3 individuals in the whole population. And then they rebounded up to several hundred, and there's no observed negative effects of anything. It all depends on what genes are persisting. So if you end up with 2 individuals of any species, and there's an allele that's bad, right? It causes, a heart problem or an eye defect or something like that in a species that needs that. Then that species, starting from only 2 species, that allele, unless it's very strongly selected for and against, will always cause problems. And that's, the inbreeding problem is, we have a lot of deformities or something popping up. But then you look at another scenario where something like an eye deformity doesn't matter, like blind cavefish, where it cost them too much energy to continue having eyes, and so the individuals that adapted to not having eyes were better off than the individuals that did. So it's very contextual. With captive invertebrates, it is 99.9% of the time not an issue at all. Some of these roaches in particular were started from only 1 adult female. And then, of course, we have hundreds of thousands, millions of dubias being traded in the United States right now and whatnot. And to think that somebody would be like, maybe inbreeding might be a problem, when they don't realize the history was all of this, all the best colonies, all the worst colonies, all came from 1 female or a handful of individuals, basically. So there are also phenomena called things like purifying selection, which is basically you bring in a couple individuals from the wild, they have babies, and in that first generation of babies, there's very strong pressure against things that don't work in captivity. So all those individuals die, they don't eat, they don't grow, etc. Couple generations down the line, you basically have a population that's adapted to the conditions in captivity, so you don't have those die-offs and whatnot anymore. So more importantly than inbreeding or anything like that is husbandry.
Yes.
So one example, strongest example, Elliptorhina davidi, which is the bumpy hissing cockroach, still very rare in collections, probably because of what I'm about to say, was started from a single adult female collected under a palmetto frond in Madagascar. I talked to the professor who collected it and started all the world's cultures of this species. So for a while I received some, and the colony was doing well. And I was like, oh, cool, rare species doing really well. And then they started dying off en masse all of a sudden. I thought, oh no, it's inbreeding. I'm at one generation in, the inbreeding's hitting. And then I kept them going for years, and they do well, they do bad, they do well, they do bad. Over time, I thought, well, like if it's inbreeding or something like that, why haven't I had them like all die off yet? Why do I have such huge success, every once in a while? And so I re-examined my husbandry, and I thought, Madagascar, certain parts of Madagascar can get very hot. They also get very cold, but they get very hot. This was collected from a female in southern Madagascar under a palm frond on a plantation or something like that, in baking sun, presumably. So I started keeping them warmer. I started giving them 100+ degree spot in the enclosure. And all of a sudden, within about a year, no more random die-offs, no more anything bad happening with this colony. So I was like, it was the husbandry. Now, the up and down is the other side of that story. When I lived with my parents, counterintuitively, the winter was the hot time of year because the furnace would be on and blowing hot, dry heat into the bug room. And during the summer, the AC would be on, blowing cool, moist air into the bug room. So I had an inversion of seasons, basically. It's not the seasonality, I believe, that was causing the problems. It's simply the fact that during the winter they were warm, and during the summer they were cold, and they didn't like the cold. And I thought back, usually spring, summer was when I'd start getting the die-offs and whatnot. So sometimes when you have problems, it's you got to really extrapolate to what's going on, because we may think that conditions are very consistent within our homes. Probably to us, because we're humans, we have a very wide range of things that we can tolerate. But to bugs, during the winter time, the humidity in my basement can be as low as 55%. The bug room in the basement, 55% during the winter time. During the summer, even if the temperature is the same, it can go all the way up to 75-80% humidity. And in those conditions, an extra couple seconds of watering a culture of something sensitive can be too much water for them. So touching on the whole inbreeding thing again, is more important to have consistent husbandry to keep an eye on those parameters and make sure nothing wonky is going on, like seasonal humidity differences or whatever, than it is to worry about inbreeding, because a lot of these things came from a handful of individuals and have enumerated and have been fine, for 30, 40 years now. So, and just a little quick thought experiment. If you think about a colony of Dubia roaches, the amount of time that it takes to think, oh, well, these two siblings are going to mate, these two are going to mate, whatever. You're looking at a couple of 2 to 3 years before you would notice, genetic population changes in your bin. It's far more likely that something in your husbandry is going to change that will cause them to increase numbers or decrease. You might get a different food. You might feed them more of one food than another. You might have, a couple of days where it was cold or something and, a bunch of females aborted. You might have, too many. It might be too crowded. You might sell a bunch of them and end up with too little. And then you don't have the effect of their pheromones accumulating and encouraging them to be more vigorous. So that's my thoughts on inbreeding and captive invertebrates in a nutshell. Is really, you got to think of the perspective of where a lot of these things came from. And some of these, like Dubias, probably came out of Dr. Roth's lab at Dr. Roth's Roach lab at Harvard back in the 80s or early 90s. And those would have been brought in from a handful of individuals originally. So a lot of these things have been propagating for some of them almost 50 years now, like some of the hissing cockroaches and giant cave roaches, almost 50 years now. We would have been seeing the effects of inbreeding, a long time ago. And by that, I mean, we wouldn't even have the cultures that we do if inbreeding were such a big factor. So
exactly. I'm the same. I'm on the same wavelength as you. It sounds like we have a little bit of an echo here. I'm not. Did you set anything on your side? No,
I did not.
Okay, sounds like we're back. I'm sorry. So I want to make two real quick points on that. Number one, I think that we as a hobby, isopods, geckos, whatever you want to talk about, I think that we're really, really quick to take credit, and I think that we're slow to admit blame. I think that it's easy to say that's because I've been working with this species for 2 years and it's breeding, and I think that it's a little bit harder for us to say, yeah, I was feeding apples in the fall, and that's why maybe in the fall, because I'm watching this so closely, that's why this colony took off. And I think that we need to watch our animals better and kind of keep track of things a little bit better. The second point that I want to make, and this is Tammy on the screen, you had talked about your winter being different than your summer. I'm just the opposite. My summer is, I kind of, I don't yell at my wife, but I kind of stress to her that we can't turn on the air conditioning until it's kind of super hot outside, because once that air conditioning goes on, it's hard to turn it off. And because it just feels so nice in here, it's 70 degrees instead of 75 or 76. But 70 degrees and all my flipping geckos are shut down. So, my temperature control in this house, I try to balance with the animals as much as possible, and as much as I can get away with it and not get yelled at. We had a question here, and I want to find it real quick because it's such a good question. I'm sorry for kind of diverting here, but
I wanted to just pinpoint something really quick. Somebody in the chat talked about Drosophila cultures. Yeah, about rapid generation. So this is a culture of melanogaster. This is my longest running line of melanogaster that I did horrible things to these fruit flies. I got them from a Petco because I needed emergency flies, and for 7 or 8 generations, because I was feeling particularly sadistic and I was curious, I took only one female. Every generation, every time, just moved one female to start a culture. One female for 7 or 8 generations. And now and that's why I have it labeled inbred. This is my specialty inbred line. And now they have become very adapted to my diet blend. And they're the only fruit fly culture that I have maintained in-house for more than a year. We're going on a year and 3 months now.
Unbelievable.
They were they were forced to quickly adapt because of the rigorous conditions that I put them through. By the time that, the last female, whatever babies had survived to adulthood, they were very micro adapted to this mix that I'm using. And so they get the most out of it. It's very efficient and whatnot. And I can neglect cultures a little bit because they just utilize every inch of it. So it's very contextual. That could have crashed and burned after one generation. It entirely could have. But now I have this nice inbred line, and I'm thinking maybe I'll do it another 10 generations. Maybe the next culture I'll set up, I'll just start pulling the one female and see what happens. So
2 years from now, I'm going to have you back on, and we're going to talk about this one cup of fruit flies that you're working with. I have a real quick question, then we're going to get over to Nicholas's question. My question is oranges. Oranges, you've got to use oranges in your dubia colonies. You haven't talked a second about using oranges because oranges stimulate breeding. And if you don't use oranges in your dubia colonies, you're not going to get the successful breeding of your dubias. Okay, what do you think about that?
They are a good fruit. The reason I don't use oranges is because the price has gone up on them. at least in my area over the last couple of years. It's a lot more efficient for me to use apples or to use bananas. Another thing about the oranges is that, at least in my colonies, if there's too much of the rind left, I'll get fruit flies.
Yes.
So they go off, more. They start entering a state of decomposition that's not appealing to the roaches more quickly than most apples do. But they are a great food to feed to roaches. One last other point is, when you keep them in with hissing cockroaches, some hissing cockroaches under certain conditions can encourage the growth of not beneficial fungi, some that people have allergies to. So a lot of people talk about their hisser bins and one day being like, oh, I couldn't work with them, and nose started running, eyes started watering, and all this other stuff. So when I would use oranges very frequently for hissers, in my family, there's a minor penicillin allergy, and penicillin is the fungus that produces penicillin is very common on orange rinds and different other citrus fruits. So I would have penicillin start growing on the rinds and whatnot in with the roaches, and that would give me some problems. So that's another thing to watch out for. And of course, you can avoid that by just putting in, the actual fruit, peeling it, but that's extra work. So, and I don't always have time for that. So, but it is a good fruit to use for, as a good general fruit if you have it available readily and for a good price. Yeah, oranges and any sort of fruit really. It's the sugars and whatnot. It's good for hydrating the roaches too.
What I didn't hear you say that oranges are a Viagra to the roaches.
It has been an old roach keeping trick to, if you have females of any species that look like they need to squirt out some babies, to throw some oranges in to get them to do that. Over the years I've thought, it's kind of like a little superstitious thing with me. If I look at a colony and think, oh, I'm not getting any babies out of these. If I have oranges, I'll throw one in there, but it's not something that I regularly go to per se.
I look at it as more of a placebo. I look at it as if somebody's taking the time to dedicate to feeding specifically oranges, they're dedicating more time to their animals. And by dedicating more time to their animals and putting it in, taking it out, hopefully before molds and everything, they're probably going to experience better care and better maintenance. And my thought is it might not have anything at all to do with the oranges per se. Apples, bananas. It's just that they're more focused on their animals. Nicholas asked, do you use, and sorry for the roundabout there, but Nicholas asked, do you use a cleaner crew for your Dubias?
Yes, I use Alphatobius diaperinus, the lesser mealworm beetles. In the past, I have used dermestid beetles on occasion for some cultures. The only problem there is, and this is another situation that I need to dissect, whether or not the dermestid beetles began feeding on freshly molting roaches, or what I'm thinking is probably more likely is when you reach a certain number of dermestid beetles, or just a certain number of another sort of organism in with the roaches, that the movement of those organisms can actually, the density of movement can stress the baby roaches out. So you'll end up with very high infant mortality, and then, of course, they'll clean up the corpses. So it'll look like they're directly predating or something on them, when, as I said, I'm suspecting more it's just constantly being interrupted by beetle larvae or whatever can be very stressful for the tiny roaches. So I use the Alphatobius now because they seem to go a little bit deeper into the substrate away from where the roaches tend to hang out, and they tend to get pushed out of the little clusters of roaches that form also. So
I was headed to my pen to take a note. I've taken 3 or 4 notes, and then it's like, well, gosh, I could just rewatch this live stream. So hopefully, this is amazing information. And again, I don't want to keep you all night here because I probably could. But let me ask, if anybody else has a question here at the very end of this, go ahead and ask it in the stream right now, in the chat right now. But as you're thinking of a question real quick for Kyle, let me ask this question. We talked about oranges. We talked about proteins. We talked about genetic diversity. We talked about a lot of things just kind of thrown out there to the community, to the reptile keeping community, to the bug keeping community. Are there any other things that you've heard? Any other I don't want to call them myths, but things that you've heard that, really aren't, people are saying, do this, do that, that you hear that really aren't the right care to give these animals, these roaches? Is there any pointers that you can leave us with to help us care for our roach colonies better? I guess that's my question.
I think we've touched on a lot of things. Something else that I've noticed over the years with other stuff is, just in general, is people may get a colony of dubias from an expo and set them up perfectly and whatnot, and then not have any success. And this is something that is, I mean, it's intrinsic to a lot of invertebrates, and I have wondered over the years, the exact reason for this, because ruling out everything else. And the thing with some of these roaches is, when you take them out of the large scale commercial breeding operations and set them up differently, is they have, as I talked about before, they may have micro adapted to those conditions. They may be they're in the process of becoming, they have food and resources and all this stuff, even if it's not the best for them, 100 to 1,000 years in the future, they're going to become more suited to those conditions, even if it's not, apparent currently. But another thing that is just more in the public's eye in general now is the importance of the microbiome. And I touched on that before with their endosymbionts. And I'm realizing, and this applies to a lot of other roaches too, that if you get roaches that are under some sort of stress or that have some sort of imbalance like that, and you set them up perfectly, sometimes you're doomed to fail even under those conditions, or you have to put in a lot of effort or have things just absolutely perfect to get them back on track. So, something like them, a colony that you receive, if it's kept too dry for a couple of weeks, or if it's fed the wrong thing for a couple of months or something like that, can have these effects on the roaches that are very difficult to change, even when you perfectly correct the husbandry. And from there, somehow some of those things seem to transfer on to the offspring, either in, when they're forming embryonically, they don't get the right nutrients. If it's a pathogen, it may have some sort of effect on their development or whatnot. And so some of these effects of bad or different husbandry can linger for many generations and have to be really sort of bred out or corrected with really, really good husbandry. So one particular example I'll give really quick is, I had a good colony of mega glow spot cockroaches going for many years. And then I went through some tough times back about 3-4 years ago, and I really neglected the colony. So by the time that I had picked things back up again, I had a lot of subadults and adults, and I was, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to water very frequently, and I'm going to feed them the best part of the apples, and change the dog food out. Even if it gets just, I did everything, that I knew would have gotten them going. And they just did not produce. They were fine. They lived a very long time, but they just did not produce. And so the effects of the couple of months that I did not tend to them were something that I could not rectify or get them to start going again from. Or alternatively, some other cultures like Blabrus boliviensis, where there was a time where for some reason I would have a lot of adult die-offs. And it took many generations of good husbandry to get to the point where it's like, oh, I can just throw in handfuls of dog food. I can throw in handfuls of anything, and they're not going to have any problems. So basically, is sometimes my advice for people who are struggling with dubia roaches, or just any invertebrates in general, is make sure that you get good stock, and you may have to you have to learn some things about roaches that are not very well quantified right now. Like, if you get a cup of dubia roaches and you've got a bunch of 3rd or 4th instars and a bunch of them are missing tarsi, or they're weirdly colored, or, the antennae are all short and bitten off, things you have to really hone in on and be like, are these the healthiest roaches? And just sort of taking that extra time to examine those sort of things,
Great points. I'm going to get over to Mr. and Mrs. Moralia. Not sure if it was covered earlier, but was wondering about pet roach and or display roach recommendations. So could you give us a couple of roaches that you would set up in a display tank?
Yes, I can. And in fact, this is something I'm going to be moving more into in the future is touching on this topic of display roaches is for years, as far as sort of like non-dogs, non-cats, non-rabbits, non-mice sort of hobbies and whatnot, fish keeping has really sort of led the way with the diversity of things, the number of people that are captive breeding things, people with rare tetras and live bearers that it's the last of the species and they have it going in 3 10-gallon tanks in their Brooklyn apartment or something like that. And it's been very appealing to a very wide audience to have a lot of different organisms cohabitating successfully. In roaches, most of them aren't territorial. There's a good size difference between you have a bunch of sizes to pick from, a bunch of colors, a bunch of behaviors. So roaches are kind of a premium potential organism to create communal display tanks with the biggest thing standing in the way of that is that fish kind of have to be out and about, except for things like catfish and loaches that will hide, but people kind of accept that as part of what they are. But the fact that most roaches are naturally nocturnal has been the biggest hurdle, at least at low densities. So finding roaches that are day active, that are colorful, that aren't going to get out and infest your house or something like that has been the sort of biggest hurdle. And we have a lot of species available now that can be stitched together into basically a communal setup that could be used for display. So basically, some good display roaches, Theria species, dominoes, question marks, orange dominoes. And these, I'm trying to pick things that are day active. The Hemithyrsospora are amazing. You'll get Ictobiidae species, little penguin is a neat roach that's also day active. And another thing, though, is when you have a large colony of pretty much any roach, they acclimate and they'll just be hanging out all hours of the day for most species anyways. So for other display roaches, big stuff, giant cave roaches, peppered roaches, and these are also all good pet roaches too. If you want to be really cool and weird and original, a lot of the Paraplaneta species, the ones that don't, not Americana per se, but if you're feeling really cool, Paraplaneta Americana venom, they're actually surprisingly easy to maintain or contain and maintain in a 10-gallon with a gasketed lid and whatnot. So, there's all roaches are excellent pets and also for displays at proper density. Just basically pick stuff that's day active for quick, easy results. If you're fine with building up a colony, you can't go wrong with pretty much any of them.
Outstanding. I tell you, we could go on and on here, but I'm just going to pull a couple of more questions here. Emily is asking, do Dubia roaches really mother or parent their young?
So there's very high investment in their babies, and some roaches, like rhino roaches, will raise them for several instars. A lot of things in that family, Blabberidae, there is some degree of parental care. In Dubias, they will watch over them for the first instar until they harden, and then once they leave the mother, they're sort of at the mercy of the colony. But there is some evidence in some cases where they have shown guarding behavior of newborn babies, where they'll stand over them or what have you. A lot of that investment for blabbered roaches, where they maintain the egg case and incubate it, that's the parental investment, is watching that over so it's not eaten or parasitized by something. So
let me get, I'm going to see if I can do this. I just lost it. There we go. I'm going to hit Emily's question one more time. Is chicken feed, and because I'm so selfish, I have this question as well. Is chicken feed a good food for Dubia roaches?
Yes. Again, mixed in with, offer a couple of things at the same time. It is a pretty good staple. I'm not sure. The calcium probably doesn't matter. A lot of it has extra calcium for egg laying and hens. For roaches, their exoskeleton is not made out of calcium. And another thing is, as far as people's paranoia about different organisms not getting enough calcium, invertebrates at least, there's calcium in places you would never expect, like in leaf litter and in wood. So.
Yes, absolutely. Great point. I'll comment on Emily's question just real quick because I've done a little bit of research on this too. Just watch your chicken feed because there's some that are treated and you want to stay away from anything treated. Medicated chick feed, you want to kind of stay away from that. And then one more question from the group here. Can you keep multiple species of hissing cockroaches together?
Big, gigantic asterisk for yes. So most of them can hybridize, and most of the ones in culture, if it's not coming with very specific information that it's a pure strain, it's probably hybridized as far as Gramphidorina go. You are probably, and this may come back to bite me in the ass one day, you can probably feel comfortable keeping Gramphidorina and Princisia species, members of those genera, with members of the genus Elliptorhina without worry. And with that said, also Ailuropida with Elliptorhina without worry. Probably, I would 90% sure. If you keep any Gramphidorina, Princisia, and as I found out the hard way a couple of years ago, Ailuropida with other member, any of those three genera together, you will produce hybrids. You will produce cross-genre or cross-species hybrids. So I do not recommend keeping multiple species from those genera together. And like I said, currently I cannot say that any of those will hybridize with Elliptorhina. At this point, I would not be surprised, but there's nothing to suggest that they will at the moment.
At the moment. So, audience, if you're doing this and you have problems, you know who to contact. Don't message me. Message Kyle. We could go again, Kyle. I think I told you this would be about a 20-minute talk or so, and now it's, what is it, 4 hours, 5 hours? I can't know. It seems like 20 minutes. It really does. And again, I have a list of questions here, and we're going to hold this on a different session. I want to come back about a year from now and find out about those fruit flies and see how they're doing. One last question that I have, though, and I want to thank everybody that's been watching this and sticking around for this long time. And I know why they're sticking around, because you've been a unbelievable source of information. But I want to
thank you.
Let you go because I don't want to take your whole night, but I thank you so much for coming on here to the Supreme Gecko channel. I do have one more question. How do people contact you? How can they find you?
Right now, best way is to send an email. I've been properly caught up on all my emails and whatnot meticulously for several months now.
Wow.
roachcrossing@gmail.com. Or simply go to the roachcrossing.com and then follow what is said on the Contact Us or the Order/Contact Us page, which is in the top menu.
If you've not been to roachcrossing.com, and the link is in the description, so please go there immediately after the show. Go there and spend another 2 hours looking at this site. There's so much information there. And one thing that I knew, but I didn't know, I knew this a long time ago and that I forgot about it, but do you do podcasts? Do you do?
I do.
Just take one more minute. Sorry. Take one more minute and talk about your podcasts.
So on Thursdays, as I try to do some site work, updating availability, blogs, blah, 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 as well as go through some emails, I have been doing a live stream at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Every Thursday. Sometimes I've started doing a couple of giveaways. I will not just to preach it for myself, but for people who are looking to talk to some very smart and extremely engaged boots on the ground invertebrate culture people, I highly recommend it. Not just, like I said, not just for me, but some people like TJ Ombrell, who does a lot of stuff with darklings and a lot of new roach species. Alan John, who's just all over the place, whip spiders and vinegaroons and millipedes and roaches, just all, people who are out swapping stuff and collecting things for us for the first time culture and even identify. There's a lot of people that pop into that chat who are very active in invertebrate culture. And so I would encourage anybody who's looking to get into that to definitely stop by, if not for me, for networking and seeing what other people are working with, because these guys are amazing. So
I feel terrible because I knew about this years, quite a while ago, maybe not years ago, but at least a year ago. And I just haven't visited the site. And I apologize, but I will be watching, listening, and taking in some of this information. This is amazing information. Everybody's saying thank you, Kyle. This is unbelievable show, one of our best. I greatly appreciate you joining us tonight. This is a ton of information that I'll probably watch. I've got some notes, but I'm going to have to watch it at least 3 or 4 more times to take in all the species names and all the fine detail that you provided here. Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Me. And thank everybody for tuning in to listen to us ramble, I suppose.
Absolutely. Again, I think we could go on for hours on this. This is a great session. I appreciate your time. I appreciate everybody joining us tonight and sticking with us. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, Kyle.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Bye-bye.